Hey good people, welcome to Russ Can Fly. What airplanes have I flown? Let's take a trip down memory lane. Let's go!
Oh my goodness, Russ can fly.
Okay, so I want to thank my brother Rich for giving me the inspiration to do this video. I want to show you something that Rich made, and I think it was so amazing, but check this out. So as you can see, these were made by my brother Rich. He's been very supportive, and actually you've seen me interview him before. But I came into the FBO and he gifted me these amazing pictures that he made for me. Now I know, it's one of those things where, I am just ever so grateful of my Russ Can Fly community. But I thought this was just such an awesome gesture. But the thing that I really loved is that, he didn't ask me to do it, or I didn't ask for this. He just did it out of the kindness of his heart. Brother Rich, I really do appreciate this giving that you've done, and the fact that you took the time to make these wonderful gifts for me. I definitely appreciate it. But here's the other thing that was actually kind of came out of this whole thing. Now, not only did it warm my heart that Rich took the time to not only make these pictures for me, but to also bring them to the airport, which I thought was pretty amazing. But one of the other things that it did is it actually spurred this idea of, I couldn't remember that I had flown 6068 Golf or November 3576 Mike. And then it made me think, wow, these are some of the airplanes that are on these pictures. And so in addition to little Sammy, which has always been my favorite, Charlie, don't get jealous, girl, it's all good. You're always my favorite, babe. But in terms of aircraft that I've had to rent and fly, little Sammy will always have a special place in my heart, because I really did build the most time in that airplane, except for Charlie. And it really did make me the pilot that I am. And it's just such an awesome small aircraft. But it got me thinking, wait a minute, that's right, 6086 Golf. I forgot that I flew that Cessna. And there was another one that I flew. And then I was like, wait, what plane did I train in? But wait, which plane did I take my check ride in? And so it made me think, wait a minute, I've flown a lot of different airplanes over the last, 4 years that I've been doing this journey. And so I thought, it'd be cool to do a nice, trip down memory lane to see which airplanes I've flown. So hopefully as I go through my logbook, I'm actually able to pull pictures up so you can see these airplanes through FlightAware. But I just thought it'd be a cool exercise just to see and to show you all the different airplanes that I've flown, because I know many of you have been on this journey with me since 2019 when this all started. But even I couldn't remember what airplanes I flew, so I thought, let's bring it up to date. Now, I know this video is a lot different than the ones, but every now and then I like to mix it up. I like to do something different, and I thought this would be pretty cool. So let me grab my logbook so I can get these tail numbers, and we'll talk about these different airplanes. Okay, so I pull out my logbook, and it's funny because the very first flight entry is June 21st, 2019. That day, I flew a Cessna 172 November 511 Echo Romeo. I actually flew that for 0.9 hours. It was actually one of my intro flights. The thing that was interesting about Echo Romeo is I think that plane disappeared pretty much right after I did that discovery flight. And what's really interesting is I remember nothing about flying that airplane. What I do remember is we were at Wings Field, runway 6 and 24. The wind was bananas and varied. And the CFI that I was flying with at the time was relatively new. That was the first time I almost decorated the inside of a cockpit, because we kept trying to land on 2-4. Then we tried to land on 6, then 2-4. We must have done maybe 4 or 5 go-arounds. And that was my first time actually flying in an airplane. He was having some difficulty getting that airplane on the ground, and I got to tell you, yeah, I almost got sick. But I literally only flew Echo Romeo one time, and that was during my discovery flight on June 21st, 2019. The next airplane that I flew was a Cessna 172 November 901 Quebec Sierra. Now, you've heard me talk about Quebec Sierra many a time on this channel, and she is definitely featured in a lot of videos. 901 Quebec Sierra was my favorite 172. For some reason, that airplane really just spoke to me. I was able to dial her in terms of trimming. I understood what she was going to do in terms of all my maneuvers, because remember, these are when I actually started taking training flights. And in fact, the first training flight I took in her, November 7th, 2019, was my first absolute lesson. And actually, that time my CFI was Kyle. And that first lesson video is in is part of the rotation. You got to go way back to my very first flight lesson. You will see 901 Quebec Sierra. Now, I think she's changed since I was in the cockpit. When I was flying her, she was pretty much just a six-pack. I think the owner has put in G5s and all that kind of stuff. Probably it looks like a little bit like the instrumentation panel I have in Charlie. But man, that Cessna 172 was one of those aircrafts that for whatever reason, it really spoke to me, and it brought me a long way during my training. So that's a plane that I will always remember fondly. What's interesting is that that aircraft is still located at Wings Field. And if you go back a few videos, if I'm ever at Wings Field, you'll see her parked out on the ramp. And I've almost been tempted to like leave a note on the windscreen for the owner to say, hey, listen, would you be, interested in allowing a brother to fly with you in your airplane? I'd love to get back in the cockpit of 901 Quebec Sierra. But yeah, that was definitely an amazing airplane, and the one where I did my first flight lesson. Now, this was interesting. I had forgotten all about this, and that's why I'm glad I was able to pull my logbook out. So back March 14th of 2020. So this is just before COVID hit, right? I flew this Cessna 172 November 5133 kilo. Now, it was interesting because November 5133 kilo kind of showed up. And it was one of those airplanes that I really didn't like it. I can't remember if it was like the first time I flew a fuel injected or something, but there was something about that airplane that I just wasn't feeling. And so literally that day, March 14th, I flew November 5133 kilo. The next time I flew was May 14th. Then just before the bottom fell out of the world, that was the only 2 times that I flew that airplane. And like I said, there was a couple things, like I remember it pulled to the right, or the rigging was off, or there was something about it. But it was like one of those things where, well, because I wanted to train and that was the airplane that was available, because I believe that 901 Quebec Sierra, if I remember correctly, and again, this was what, 5 years ago, was down. There was anytime there was well, let me go back. Most of the aircraft at Wings at that point were leasebacks. 901 Quebec Sierra was no exception. And so a lot of times, if 901 Quebec Sierra needed a new cylinder, the owner always wanted to be the one to break it in. And so a lot of times, if something happened with the cylinder, it needed a new one for whatever reason, the owner would take the airplane for about a week or something like that, take it offline and do whatever he needed to do in terms of breaking the cylinder in. So that meant it was offline. And so at that point, this 33 kilo airplane shows up, and I get into it a couple times and I'm like, Yeah, no, not feeling it. But it's in my logbook and part of my airplane journey. Now, the next airplane that I fly also has a special place in my heart because it's the airplane that I took my check ride in. So if you go back in the in the archives and you look at the airplane that I flew to Lancaster to take my check ride, you will see November 717 Golf. Yes, I love that airplane. Now, I struggled with 717 Golf. The first time I flew her was May 15th, 2020. And the thing that was interesting about 717 Golf was it was the first aircraft that had electronic aviation equipment in it. I believe it had a Garmin 430 or something like that. And I remember the first time I got in that airplane and tried to, start messing around with with those avionics. I just didn't understand what was happening. That was one of the things that was kind of frightening about my check ride, because when I took my check ride, I was worried that the DPE was going to make me do a bunch of stuff with those avionics, and I really wasn't that used to that avionics suite. Most of my training was in 901 Quebec Sierra, but for whatever reason, it was offline or something was happening, and I really wanted to do my check ride. I had flown 717 Golf, and I was actually a better pilot in it. For whatever reason, the rigging was dialed in, my steep turns, stalls, all that kind of stuff. I was nailing that stuff. It was just that 430 that I was, rushing to get up to speed. Fortunately, we already know the end to the story. So I am done with my check ride. I'm not gonna even play because I'm not gonna even play. I am flying back to wings as a licensed pilot. I ended up passing my check ride, and 717 Golf is the airplane that you see me in these pictures where I passed my check ride. That's 717 Golf. So that airplane will always have a special place in my heart. Oh, all of them do, except for 33 Kilo. But at any rate, that one will always have a special place in my heart because it made me a pilot. Okay, so the next airplane that's in my logbook, I'm actually scratching my head. I don't remember flying this airplane, but it's in my logbook. So back in October 29th of 2020. So of course there was a long layoff. So I believe May, bottom falls out. So it's May, June, July, August, September. I think flight school was either closed or they were trying to figure out what to do, whatever. And so I think I resumed back in October, something like that. And when I got there, this weird Cessna 172, November 53340 was on the field. And I flew it for 1.3 hours. And it looks like it was, I can't tell what I did that day. But it's interesting, maybe we did, I don't know what we did that day, but it was that one time where I flew that airplane. Now, if I'm not mistaken, now that I think about it, this airplane, November 53340, I think this is the airplane that wouldn't start one time. So if you go back, and maybe that's the reason why I only flew it once, but I even think that it caught on fire. There's something about this particular Cessna. It's in my logbook once. And I don't really remember it, but yeah, it's in my logbook, so I flew it. Cessna 172, 53340. Who knows? Okay, I made a mistake, so I had to go a couple more pages. But apparently, I flew November 53340 more than I thought, because I see an entry here for April 3rd, 2021, April 9th, 2021, April 17th, 2021, April 21st or 24th, 2021. Yeah, so it looks like November 53340 was in rotation more than I thought. I don't remember that airplane. I really don't. Yeah, I don't even know what to say about it. I really just don't remember that airplane. Okay, now this is really interesting. I forgot all about this. It's just so funny to go back through this logbook. And like I said, Rich, thank you so much for, inspiring this video, because had you not put, some of those airplanes on, that picture that you made for me, I wouldn't have thought to do this. But what's interesting is that there is a Cessna 172 SP Sierra Papa model. I thought I never flew Sierra Papa models. I thought it was only Mike's or, I never know I flew an SP, but I did a couple times. So on May 10th of 2021, I flew a Cessna 172 SP November 614 Foxtrot Alpha. Wow. Now, I remember this airplane because it scared the mess out of me. So, one of the things that I want my non-pilot friends to understand, you can fly a manufacturer. Like, let's say, you buy a Ford. Well, Ford makes everything from the Ford Escort or, whatever the smallest sedan is, to the Ford Bronco, to the Ford F-150, right? So just because you have a manufacturer, there's a lot of different vehicles underneath that manufacturer. Airplanes are the same way. So you may have a Cessna 172, but they're not created equal. So I've flown Cessna 172s where the engines are 140 horsepower. But this airplane, this SP, it was a beast. And so since I was used to flying a more docile aircraft, with the exception of 901 Quebec Sierra, I mean, it had that had some grunt to it. But this SP, I mean, that airplane was no joke. So yes, I remember November 614 Foxtrot Alpha, because I remember getting in there to train thinking, I don't know if I can handle this thing. And I really couldn't. The nose was a little heavier. I had to be a little heavier on the controls. I had to be more mindful of my trim, all of that kind of stuff. So that airplane was a little bit much. And it looks like I only flew it twice. Once on May 10th, 2021, and again May 21st, 2021. And I don't see any other log entries after that, because November 901 Quebec Sierra was the next airplane I flew after that, and on into, looks like on into my check ride or solos, definitely. Okay, now this is where it gets fun. So we're now talking about entries post check ride. And so my check ride, I did a flight in 717 Golf post check ride. So that's right. So it was 8/24/2021, Cessna 172 November 717 Golf, back and forth to Lancaster. That was my check ride. And then I flew 717 Golf a couple times post check ride, just to, start building my chops with my brand new license in my pocket. Now, a strange thing happened. Right after that, Wingsfield decided that they were no longer going to do a leaseback program, and they were going to become like an accelerated program. So they got rid of all of their high wing aircraft and bought a fleet, literally a fleet of Piper Cherokee 181s, those trainers. And that's how they began to do their flight school, which meant I could no longer rent there because they didn't rent those out to anyone. And so that's how I ended up getting to Doylestown, because I still wanted to fly and I wanted to rent aircraft. And although Wings was a closer airport for me, since they were no longer renting aircraft, I had to find a place. And I remember, during my time where I was looking for a flight school, I had come out to Doylestown and I saw that they had aircraft. So I looked at both Northeast Philly and Doylestown again so that I could continue my flight journey. And fortunately, they had aircraft that they were willing to rent to, you know, folks like me. And so my very first flight in an aircraft here at Doylestown was on September 16th, 2021, a Cessna 172 Mike, November 9er 2789er. Wow. Now, November 9er 2789er, that airplane was special. I'm just going to say November 9er 2789er was definitely a little long in the tooth, but she flew like a beast. I will say this too. It was, you know, a lot of fun to fly because that Mike, so that Cessna 172 Mike model was definitely easy to fly. She was docile. I had a tendency to float a little bit, but that was only because I was coming into Doylestown and I was still getting used to the sight picture here as opposed to the one I had at Wings. But yeah, I remember November 9er 2789er, and specifically I remember one time I took off, I'm flying, it's a little chilly out, I turned on the carb heat, nothing was happening. It was a real brisk flight. Good thing it was short. But yeah, November 9er 2789er. Crazy. And then one faithful day, I'm going out to the field and I'm about to fly another Cessna 172. And I see this little airplane, high wing, but man, it's a two-seater. It looks tiny. I'm like, what's up with that? Let me go ask about that. So I go back to the FBO and yeah, so many memories. So this is when Al was still with us, and went into the FBO, and I remember asking him about it. And he said, yeah, great airplane to fly. If you've never flown a 152, you know, of course, we're gonna have to check you out in it. But yeah, you'll love it. Prepared to go nowhere fast, which I was fine with because I wanted to build time. And plus, at the time, it was $105 an hour to rent wet. Sold. So, my first flight in the famous November 94006, aka Little Sammy, was on September 19th, 2021. That was the first time I flew Little Sammy. And I gotta tell you, that day, I flew maybe just a, 0.3, and I just did a checkout. And I remember landing that first time, and I thought, that was so easy. And it was love. I mean, it was like, I love this airplane. Because remember, I just had finished my check ride. And so remember, I was still a relatively low time, well, what they would consider a low time pilot. And even though I had, 100 hours or so, that's low. Actually, I've got about 420 hours now. That's still low. And so 100, you're like a baby. Now I'm probably a good, toddler, maybe preteen, somewhere in that range. So that Cessna 152 was perfect. Simple instruments, very docile handling characteristics, very basic, 105 horsepower engine, or something like that. And just a blast to fly. So yeah, that was the first time me and Little Sammy had a chance to party, and there's a bunch of entries after that. Okay, so this video is getting longer than I thought it was gonna be because, really, there were some airplanes I had forgotten. So the other airplane that I flew here, they had another Cessna 172 in addition to 9er 2789er, was November 734 Alpha Uniform. That airplane is actually still on the field. When I flew that airplane, I was like, wow, because I believe it had a newer engine in it. that was the first time I had flown an airplane with an engine as young as it was. I think it was like some 100 or something hours, I know, since it had been overhauled, and beast of an airplane. And I've flown that airplane a couple times, but the first time I flew it, October 23rd, 2021. Yeah, definitely a blast. And like I said, if you come out to Doylestown, you'll still see Alpha uniform on the training field. Amazing, amazing airplane. Okay, so we're getting down to the wire here. So this is what started me on this video, because one of the things that Rich did is he put this airplane as part of the montage of the picture. And as you can see here, it's right here. And I had forgotten all about this airplane. But man, what an amazing airplane. So November 6086 Golf, another Cessna 172. So the first time I flew that airplane was November 21st, 2021. Now, 6086 Golf kind of scared me. For some reason, that airplane just seemed angry. Like, I mean, I don't know what it is, but for whatever reason, like, you push that throttle to the firewall, and it was something about the characteristic of that engine. That airplane could roll. I don't know what it was, but even the SP 6086 Golf seems it would give it a run for its money. And I'm not exactly sure why that was. There was just something grunty and angry about that airplane. And I remember one time going up thinking, this airplane seems kind of wild. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but if you've ever driven a car, you know, where you get in and you're just like, this car seems to have a personality. 6086 Golf was that airplane. That airplane seemed to like have a personality, like, you know, I want to get up here and I just want to go wild. Like we about to get it in. You know, it's about to be lit. That was 6086 Golf. It wasn't just get up there and fly. 6086 Golf wanted to get up there and tear stuff up. You know what I mean? And so I'm like, as long as you don't tear me up, we're all good. Okay, now here's where we're getting down to the wire here. So after flying 6086 Golf, Alpha uniform, Little Sammy, 902 789er, I was kind of working my way through all of the Cessnas here at Doylestown. They did have a couple low wings, and I'm like, I've never flown a low wing. And for whatever reason, they had some low wings here, but I never, you know, started to venture into them until one day I'm walking to Little Sammy. We're getting ready to take a flight. I believe I was going to go to Harrisburg that day. And I walked past, and I can't even remember the tail number for this airplane, but I saw that it was a Piper Cherokee of some variety. And I thought to myself, you know, I've never flown a low wing before. And for some reason, because I was flying with my friend Derek, who has a Piper Cherokee 6, I always remember, you know, flying in that airplane, and I thought, what is it like to fly a low wing aircraft? I'm just curious. So on December 13th, 2023, it looks like. No, it was 2022 because it was on the cusp of being 2023. But December 13th, 2022, I flew a PA-28 181 November 293 Lima Alpha over at Northeast. And that was my first ride in a, you know, Piper Cherokee of any variety. Now, here's the thing. I took a ride in that because Lima Alphas over at Northeast were these new training 181s. Beautiful, like Garmin G1000, G5, GFC 500 autopilots, all that kind of stuff. Beautiful, beautiful aircraft. So I was curious about what those airplanes were like. And so I did a lesson in that airplane with a thought that I would do a checkout in it. Now, one of the things that was interesting is because these were the flight school kind of premier airplanes, and when they first bought their fleet of 10, student came in, rented the airplane, prop strike. I mean, they had been there for like 2 weeks. So they were like, you know what? We're not gonna really rent these unless we like vet the heck out of people. And I think you had to do 10 hours and all that kind of stuff. But I was curious, and there was something about that base to final turn that I did where I went, uh-oh, I think I'm a low wing guy. Because I could just see. Now, and of course, you can't see underneath you like you can with the Cessna and all that kind of stuff. And Cessna versus, high wing, low wing, I'm not gonna get into that debate. All I know is that base to final turn, that did it for me. Low wing it is. And so that was my first flight in a low wing, but I knew that the Lima Alphas probably weren't gonna foot the bill because I was gonna have to take a bunch of training in them to get checked out, and they were a little bit more expensive to rent, which is understandable. Plus, I was not used to all of that, Garmin avionics stuff, so I had a lot to learn there. So instead of flying the 181s, they, being Northeast Philly, had a couple of leaseback airplanes that they were doing like they used to do at Wings. And they had a couple Piper Cherokees and a Piper Warrior that were on the line that you could rent. And so on January 21st, 2023, I flew a PA-28-161 November 2549er Quebec. And that airplane was so fun to fly, but I kind of hated it. And here's why. November 2549er Quebec was one of those airplanes that, oh man, it was touchy. Trying to start that daggone thing, you had to spin around 3 times and spit and throw soda over your shoulder and sing the national anthem while rubbing your belly. I mean, it was just crazy. And so every time I went out there, I was always so nervous and anxious of, am I going to be able to start this airplane? And one time I couldn't, tried to start it, flooded it out, had to wait, my time expired, and I'm just like, I hate this airplane. But when I could get it to run, I, actually flew that airplane, checked out in it, and flew it a couple times, and really got used to, switching the fuel tanks and all that kind of stuff. So, but as low wings go, 2549er Quebec, not a fave. Wasn't sorry to see that go because I actually think it ended up getting sold. But wasn't feeling it. Now, there's this one airplane, I forgot all about this. When did I fly this? I don't remember flying this airplane. Wow. Okay, so let me just tell you. So on February 4th, 2023, I flew a PA-28-181 November 743 Delta Sierra from P&E to deck. And I did a cross-country, first solo cross-country in a PA-28-181 glass avionics. Oh, that's right. So Delta Sierra, see, dang, this is really wild. Thank you, Rich. This has been fun. And I'm sorry this video is taking so long, but this is just the history. But yeah, Delta Sierra was this funky 181 that they had on the line that didn't stay on the line too long, but it had Aspen avionics in it. It had a PFD and an MFD, or primary flight display and multifunction flight display, Aspens right next to each other. Okay, wait, it's coming back to me. I remember this airplane had this crushed red velvet interior, I believe, and not only did it have glass avionics, which was kind of throwing me off a little bit. Luckily, the backups were all, steam gauges, so that's pretty much what I depended on. But it also had an autopilot, and that was the first time I ever pushed the button on the autopilot. It was way too creepy, and I turned it off and did not use an autopilot again until Charlie showed up in my life. But yeah, I remember Delta Sierra. I had forgotten all about that. It didn't stay on the line long. For whatever reason, it was there, and then it got sold really quickly, and it disappeared. But I remember flying it a couple times. But yeah, I didn't dig it only because those Aspen avionics. Now, I had seen the Garmin 430 and all that kind of stuff. That was my first introduction to Aspen, and I just didn't understand the functionality. So that was the only reason why I didn't dig that airplane. Plus, I remember the engine feeling a little anemic. I don't know. Yeah, it was just one of those like, I don't know, it was like a one-night stand. Okay, and this is another airplane that kicked off this whole video idea. So look at the picture. So if you look down at the bottom corner there, you see November 3576 Mike. I love 3576 Mike. That airplane was awesome. Little raggedy, you know, she definitely had, you know, seen some days, could have used, you know, an interior refresh, all that kind of stuff. But man, solid as a rock. Unlike that persnickety 9 or 5 Quebec or whatever, that airplane, 76 Mike, she was awesome. Dependable, easy to fly, you know, all that kind of stuff. Stuff was dialed in, no slop, all that kind of stuff. So definitely an older, but felt like a well cared for older aircraft. And so my first flight in November 3576 Mike, March 17th, 2023. And I flew it here to Doylestown, believe it or not, which is kind of wild. You know, I flew from Northeast Philly Airport to Doylestown and back. And just really enjoyed, you know, flying that airplane. 76 Mike for the win. Okay, so we're getting close to the end, I promise. So the next airplane that I flew is I needed to date somebody before I decided to get married. And so it was interesting. So this is the time where I first saw Charlie on my radar screen. And I didn't know much about a Piper Cherokee 235. Yes, I'd heard of Piper Cherokees, had flown a couple, but the 235 was throwing me off. And so on April 23rd of 2024, I flew a PA-28 235 or a PA-28 Bravo model as they're called, November 90373 Whiskey. And I flew that out of Westchester because they were renting that airplane. And that was the first time I had flown in a high performance aircraft. And that airplane also had a constant speed prop. And I gotta tell you, wow, was I unprepared what happened in the flight. I remember hitting that throttle for the first time, and for the first time feeling being thrown back in my seat and thinking to myself, do I have enough strength in my right leg to push this right rudder down to keep this airplane from going to the left and off the runway? It was crazy. The other thing is, you know, the constant speed prop and all that kind of stuff. But there was two things about flying that airplane that made me really think about whether or not I thought I was ready to buy Charlie. Was one, the power, but two, how heavy it was. You know, those extra 2 cylinders, it's a little bit more nose heavy. So having to do a little bit more, you know, nose up trim when coming in on final was definitely necessary. And how quickly it loses altitude when you cut the power. The CFI I was flying with that day said, I want to show you something. We were at 3,000 feet. She's like, all right, engine to idle. She's like, all right, where are you going to land? And I'm looking left and right, and I'm trying to figure out. And I'm so used to the Cessnas, right? And by the time I looked up and picked, we were like within like 800 feet of the ground or something crazy. I'm like, holy smokes. So yeah, I only flew November 90373 Whiskey once. It was just to get a feel. I thought I was going to get my high performance endorsement. One of the things I realized is that one, it had the same avionics that Charlie has in it, G5s and all that kind of stuff. I knew nothing about that kind of stuff. Also the constant speed prop, you know, and the power. So I got behind that airplane pretty quickly, and I knew that I was going to have to get more training. As you can see, I've now put my logbook down because there's no reason to look at it anymore, because the very next airplane that I flew, November 1541 Charlie. And I am so grateful that, you know, this airplane found its way to me, that the good Lord saw fit to bless me with having access to this aircraft and being able to have it as part of my next chapter of flying. And this is the only aircraft I've flown since I bought it last year. And, you know, I will say, and maybe I'm just biased because, you know, I'm paying a lot of money for this airplane. But seriously, this is the best airplane I've ever flown. And as you can see, I've flown a couple. Now, that other 235 out at, was at Brandywine Airport actually. That was a pretty cool airplane. But I think just because it had the constant speed prop, that was just a little bit too much too quick. I think the fact that this has a fixed pitch propeller just works so much better for me because there's one less thing I have to worry about, especially now that I'm doing my instrument training and all that kind of stuff. And you know, it just, this is 90, I would say 95% of my mission. Really, I can't think of anything else, you know, that I would want. Would I want to go higher and faster? Maybe, but maybe not. I mean, she's got a 1,400 pound useful load, 81 gallons of fuel, you know, and still a robust useful load even when it's full. All the great avionics and the capabilities and all that kind of stuff. And it's practical too, which speaks to me greatly. You know, fixed pitch propeller, you know, fixed landing gear, all of that kind of stuff. And so, you know, this speaks to me. And, you know, like I said, I thank the Heavenly Father for allowing this to be the airplane that found its way into my life. And I pray that I'm able to fly. That's rain. Yeah, it's raining. But I pray that I'm able to fly this airplane until I'm not able to fly anymore. So at any rate, that is it. And I'm sorry this video went as long as I did because there were some airplanes in there I didn't even realize. And so if you guys are complaining about the length of this video, blame Rich, because he's the one that started all of this. But at any rate, seriously, I want to thank you, Rich, for, you know, like I said, producing those amazing pieces of work for me. That art, that is so amazing. And I want to thank you all for being with me on this journey and supporting me in this great way. And I will say, this has been such a life-affirming journey for me and such a blessing. And each of you are such a huge blessing, especially when you take precious time out of your day to watch the video. And many of you send comments and affirmations and good advice and all that kind of stuff. So I really do appreciate it. Okay, so with that, that's it. Russ Kid, Russ Can Fly. Thank you for taking this trip with me down memory lane. Back in the sky next week. All right, I'm out of here. Peace.